There's been so much cultural messaging around pain in general and how shameful it is or how private it should be. Be careful not to burden others. We live in a very fix it culture, at least Western speaking. And so this idea that you can share pain and trust that the other person can handle their stuff, that you don't have to take care of them in witnessing your stuff. But that you can be in that and say, it's okay. I don't have to, silver line this, or I don't have to package it, in a way that's neat or tidy.
Hey, I'm Tanya Wilkinson, and this is Death on the Daily, bringing the conversation about death out of the shadows and into the mainstream. Because along with birth and change, if there's one thing that's going to happen to us all, then death is it. And we're going to explore how death actually shows up for us on the daily in a multitude of ways, and how when we allow ourselves to accept and to be with death, how it can teach us a whole heap about how to live this life well. What do we deny when we bypass our grief in our death avoidance society? It's not just our pain that we numb. In doing so, we actually deny our full humanity. Because here's the thing. Grief and death are just as human as birth and joy. They're not good or bad. They're just life. And actually a part of the same wholeness that is us. In today's episode, I'm joined by Rio Richards, a fellow griever whose personal experience of loss has really alchemized her work as a grief and trauma therapist and consultant. And Rio knows what it means to sit in the rawness of it all. And she brings that deep knowing into the way that she holds space for others. Rio is also a mother and lover of all things creative and eclectic, who weaves art and a little bit of griefy humor into her work in a way that gently invites us to explore what it means to move through our pain and not around it, and how walking that path gently and step by step can lead us back into our most human of selves. Rio, I am so excited for our conversation today. Welcome to Death on the Daily.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to speak with you today. And it's not our first time speaking, so I'm happy to see you again.
Yeah. Same here. In our last conversation, I felt like my head exploded with some of the spaces that we went to in our grief chat, which really is power and testament to when we share in our stories. So I suppose, should we start there? I would love for you to share with us a little bit about your journey and how your work and your grief journey interconnected and led you on such a path of purpose.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I was working as a therapist in 2019 when my dad was diagnosed with cancer. I call myself a baby therapist. I was pretty green at the time. And then COVID happened shortly after. So early 2020, the world, imploded. It was such a time of survival. I was seeing clients the entire time. He was going to treatments. I was driving him to chemo and seeing clients remotely. Just an odd time of survival in every sense. And then he started declining, to a point where his treatments came to an end. They said there's, nothing else that we can do for you. And I, with my mom, became caregivers. We became caregivers for him at that time. So I'd already been, partly caregiving, and then it was like, okay, I am here, and we're doing this. But it was a really confusing time, and I talk about this a lot with clients as well, where the medical field, for whatever reason, there's this sometimes thing that happens where they're not super forthcoming with you about the realities of what's happening. And I've spoken with clients, I don't know if it's about, they want you to hold on to hope because they know that that's, good for the person who's facing the imminent loss of their person, or they don't know the details. So in terms of liability, they're not going to make any guarantees. But there was a lot of confusion around that time. And then he died, and my whole world just fell apart. So took a week off from seeing clients and told a few what had happened, only a few who I felt like it was okay, and did it in an ethical way, of course. And then about 4 months later, hospice reached out to me. So our local hospice foundation reached out to me saying they needed a bereavement therapist on their team. And 4 months after going through my own devastating loss, I thought this was either the best or worst idea ever. And at that time, I really could think of little else or talk about little else other than death and grief. And I think my head was just exploding with this profound experience and what it felt like, and how do you live with this, and what do we do now? There's so much that I had never talked about with anyone before, or had really heard talked about so openly. And so I think I was just craving that connection and that understanding. So I took the job and haven't looked back since in terms of working with grievers. It was the best decision I could have made for myself at that time. Yeah.
Wow. I loved as well when you mentioned, obviously, that this decision was the best decision, but you mentioned earlier that actually when you were contemplating it, that it could also be something I could imagine that could bring up a lot. And actually, how have you found, I suppose, bringing together your own grief journey? Because I found grief to be a real wilderness and incredibly confusing at times to navigate it. But I've also found real anchoring in being in community and in being able to witness the experiences of others and have conversations that I wouldn't in my former life ever have had. So how was that journey for you of, I suppose, bringing your work together alongside your grief journey as you were personally navigating it?
Yeah, sometimes I'll describe it as I accidentally created my own secret support group where everyone else shared except for myself.
Oh, wow.
And what I mean by that is sitting with other grievers and helping them process and being their witness and holding that space for them. Not only was it actually a reprieve from my own stuff to be able to just focus my full attention on someone else. But I was learning with them. I was what I was witnessing in them was me witnessing those parts of myself as well, and so it felt so connecting. And something that I think about often is just how what an honor this job is, and how much my clients will never know how profoundly they've helped me too.
Wow. Oh, let's just take a moment to just breathe that in. That's so beautiful.
The honesty and resilience, and not resilience as in oh, you're so strong, way, but resilience is in I'm going to touch down into the darkest parts of something I could ever imagine, darkest parts of myself or life, and come back out and re-engage with people that I love, or then find a glimmer of something beautiful, that being able to be that rubber band and stretch and come back, to base, come back to you, being able to witness that again and again and again in others. How could I not be impacted, by that? And so it was just I get so emotional about it because, I was really flailing. And that work for me was such an anchor, such an unexpected anchor. And when I say it could have been the worst idea ever, I didn't know if I could hold space for others in that way with what I was going through. I didn't know how triggering that was going to be for me. I mean, of course, I had set up supports to make sure I was taking my care of myself in that with my own supervision and consultation and my own therapist. I was very aware how activating this could be for me. What I will say is I think that's what made me so effective too in that position, is that I could connect so deeply on just a human level. I was just a person with another person. I wasn't someone saying, I have all the answers. I was someone saying, I deeply understand what you're going through. And I think without me ever sharing any details of my story, that someone sitting across from me could feel that, so it's like the way that we can reflect back to anyone, no matter who we are, the way we can reflect back to that person and say, yeah, I hear that it feels like this. And here's this massive fear that you have. And wow, like how painful that must be. And really, I'm speaking from personal experience, but they're like, yes, like I feel seen. So it was just this very mutual experience that I'm so, so grateful for and have continued. I've just said, I want to do this forever. Yeah.
Oh, Rio, it's so inspiring and so beautiful, because obviously I know that for you as a therapist, it is very much the client story. But actually what I can feel is there's a real power in that peer energy from from obviously you sharing any of your journey within those spaces, because obviously I appreciate, again, that's where those ethical boundaries are. But you're right. If I think of myself as a griever, there is no substitute for someone who you know is sitting alongside you, who has that lived experience. And I think that it's so powerful through when you mentioned around that rubber band and witnessing your clients, that return to self. And then you mentioned that anchoring. I just thought it's so, that's the true power of human connection. When we boil it all down, there's such simplicity, isn't it? Of just, I'm here to witness you. And also in that moment as well, what I can really feel is that we're also witnessing ourselves and our own journeys. And I was so profoundly moving of that impact, like your ripple effect on your clients, but also then the ripple effect that obviously working with your clients has had on you in your own journey.
Gosh, that experience was so informative for how I practice today and what I believe in so many ways. A really important way being, in grad school, we're taught to not bring our human experience into the room, and we're taught to be more of the blank slate and don't bring your stuff in. Don't make it about you. There's a lot of this, old school therapy messaging. And I'm sure at some point I would have had experiences that challenged that anyways, just given who I am. But this experience in particular, being a griever and working with grievers, I mean, like I was speaking to, I watched my experience make the work better because I was letting parts of me come in and saying, I get it, me too. And of course, not sharing the details, but just being a human and not being a robot and not coming in and saying, I have the answers and you have your own pain and you can keep it over there and I'm not going to be affected by it.
Yes.
I think our humanity is so needed now more than ever, and especially in the grief space. Yeah.
The simplicity of our humanity as well, as it can come through, of just that, I witness you and I get it. And actually, you're taking me to, because if I think about all of the therapy journeys that I've been on, and actually 2 of them were through the NHS here, which obviously is going to be very rigid and very probably, I think it would be very old school in that approach. And it is very much that of I'm just sitting back over here. But outside of that, if I think about my dear friends, and it was the one who, when we found out that we were going to have to go through a termination for medical reasons with our daughter, and it was that one friend who said, you can get through this. I see you. I know because it's something that I've lived. But actually, then she stepped back and it was just that her sitting back and just listening. So it
Yeah.
was that of her just being there to witness, being there to give me little questions and prompts and
Hmm.
check-ins and everything like that. So I think there is
Hmm.
such power in that of being able to say, yeah, I see
Hmm.
you, because that is
Hmm.
also my experience. It's so
Yeah.
powerful. And it's so not,
Yeah.
it's in our world. I suppose, what do you think? What I suppose outside of the therapy space, what
Hmm.
are our barriers to, do you think, to showing up and being able to show all of us in these spaces, to be able to say to others, I too am a griever, because I'm always shocked at how few people actually step forwards in my life to
Hmm.
say, just in any sense of grief,
Hmm.
I've been there. What do you
Hmm.
think the barriers are in our society?
There's so much, has been so much cultural messaging around pain in general and how shameful it is or how private it should be, um, how, be careful not to burden others. There's so much cultural messaging that I think has just been baked into us. And then I think there's also the lack of, I don't necessarily want to call it skill. In my clinical mind, I'm thinking distress tolerance skills, but there's this lack of, like, we've never been taught how to just sit with pain and not try to fix it. We live in a very like fix it culture, at least like, Western speaking. Um, and so this idea that you can share pain and trust that the other person can handle their stuff, that you don't have to take care of them in witnessing your stuff. Um, but that you can be in that and say it's okay. I don't have to, silver line this, or I don't have to um, package it, in a way that's like neat or tidy. I think, yeah, there's just this cultural discomfort with anything that isn't fixable. And grief certainly isn't fixable, and it's just pain. And it's, it can be hard to look at. It can act as a mirror. I hear so often from grievers, um, that this statement of like, I can't imagine what you're going through. It's like, we just don't want to. It hurts too much, but we can. And that's why we don't want to look at it, is exactly because we can imagine it. And yeah, I'm curious your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I mean, that phrase, I can't imagine what you're going through, that just hit me in my heart, because it's
Mm,
so exclusionary. It puts anyone who's going through that, I've had it so countless times,
yeah.
and it puts
Yeah.
me over here. If I'm
Yeah.
in a room and that's said to me, then immediately, unless
Hmm.
there's someone who comes forth and says, I get it, I've been
Hmm.
there, then immediately I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, I'm over here in a
Hmm.
whole different reality. And I definitely think there's something around our unwillingness to be with our pain. And I truly believe that we as humans, we do ourselves a disservice, because actually, I was actually doing some writing the other day when I was reflecting on the fact that it took me 3.5 decades to get to the point where I realized that I can be with pain, and that I stopped being one of those people who would avoid and numb myself, but also then be that roadrunner-esque disappearing off as soon as someone shares something difficult. Probably with that, I can't imagine what you're going through, and then how can I just disappear from this conversation as quickly as possible? And it
Hmm.
took my daughter dying for me to really,
Hmm.
that was a true awakening. And obviously I would do
Hmm.
anything to have her here with me
Yeah.
and trade it
Yeah.
all. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I can see the beauty of that awakening, and the fact that actually from that it just was such a, it was just a crack through my heart that I knew was
Hmm.
never going to be healed.
Yeah.
And it ran so deep. But actually from that, the way that I sort of visualize it is, there was just
Hmm.
beautiful like plants, like the cracks growing through the pavement, that grew
Hmm.
through really quickly, that helped me to see, actually, even through this, and actually humanity since the dawn of humankind, and since prior to then, when we were in all of our different ancestral forms, any
Hmm.
type of living being has always had some sort of pain, some sort of challenge, some sort of discomfort. It's
And
innate
death.
within us. Yeah, and death, and it's
Yeah.
innate within us. So we can
Mhm.
hold it. But actually, when we avoid it, we do ourselves a disservice when our culture tells us, no, 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 don't go there. It's difficult. I have that with my family all the time, even with my nan at the moment. And I know that I'm witnessing things in her, ultimately her very slow dying. She's in her very, I think, possibly last few months of dementia. And there's so much stuff that I'm witnessing, but actually I know that that's stuff that my family wouldn't, because there's that there's that unwillingness to be deeply present and to be able to acknowledge and say, every time I go to see her, I see that she gets a little bit weaker. And I can see little signs and even little spiritual ones of, okay, I can see that she's slightly more turned towards the wall, and she's slightly more detached from the reality that is this world or her room in the care home. But
Yeah.
there's such an unwillingness to go there. And I
Yeah.
believe that, yeah, we do ourselves a real disservice, because my
Mhm.
experience, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well, is that when we do go there, I've just seen how it just turns the volume up on life. It's almost like if it's a wave, we hit the
Mhm.
depths of the bottom of that wave. But what that does is, for me, I've seen a mirroring of the deeper
Mhm.
I go into that wave of pain and grief, the higher up those highs then feel. When I stop
Mhm.
numbing in the pain, I actually feel more joy and beauty and
Mhm.
all that is quote unquote positive. And I hate that
Yes.
terming, because nothing, it's all
Yeah.
just human. But I
Mhm.
felt more volume up there the deeper that
Mhm.
I've gone there. And I feel like
Mhm.
if we numb and stay on this sort of little, in a much more, I suppose, controlled space of
Mhm.
experience, that actually
Mhm.
we will never feel the true depth in either direction of what it is to be human.
Yeah. You said it so beautifully. And the way that I describe that same exact concept to clients, I'll say we can't, like, our bodies can't pick and choose which emotions to turn down and which emotions to turn up, or like which ones to block and which ones to feel. And so when we have some sort of turning away from and avoiding and then not allowing in the full depths of our pain, and of course trauma informed caveat, sometimes that's for very good reason that we can't go there. So just generally speaking, when we don't let that in, we're only letting 50% of all of it in. So joy, happiness, you use the word presence, which I think is so perfect. If I am keeping this over here at a distance, I am also keeping the full 100% of peace and calm and joy and connection also at a distance. Like I can't cherry pick emotions. Like our bodies can't do that. Um, and so, yeah, I think you said it so beautifully though. That wave, I love that imagery.
Oh, oh, and I love what you just shared there. And also that trauma informed perspective, because as well, for me, so much of my story is rooted in, it was my daughter, her kicking, that called me into presence when we were in the car on the way home from the scan. I felt her kicking within me, and that brought me back into presence. So it was her, and then I decided to give her my promise that I was going to be fully present with her no matter what, and somehow managed to do that through her dying, her death, her stillbirth, and all the way through to her woodland burial. I've never been more present than in those 4 weeks. But with that caveat, because people always hear my story and go, oh, wow. But actually, it is really important to say equally, I did what was best for me in the scan, which was
Mm-hmm.
completely dissociate and
Mm-hmm.
be so away from the room, be able to voice to the doctor, I'm stood by the car, I need to go home, I am not in this
Mm-hmm.
room. And that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. So
Mm-hmm.
as well, it's understanding that wholeness of us as humanity, but also
Mm-hmm.
knowing those areas, I guess, I can feel from what you were sharing is when can we, and I suppose that's a question I would love to ask you.
Mm-hmm.
How can we as humans explore our capacity for this? How do we take those little steps in to almost do a
Mm-hmm.
bit of, in science, it's like the titration of just
Mm-hmm.
a little bit at a
Mm-hmm.
time, where I can just sense and explore my pain. How can we do
Mm-hmm.
that if perhaps we've been in cycles or just the understandable cultural conditioning of
Mm-hmm.
numbing out from our pain and avoiding it?
Yeah, I love that question. I think I typically approach it from a really practical place. Um, and I typically come at it with, how can we touch into pain while honoring that our anxiety, our nervous system, like we want control. So how can we kind of take care of both of those parts of us that are open to exploring and maybe a little bit afraid to explore or nervous to explore? And so typically I'll talk about ways to contain, have some sort of like practice that is contained. So listening to maybe a grief, podcast, or reading a book on grief. It could be, can I set my timer for 10 minutes on a day when I don't have to do anything afterwards? Like, how can I set myself up and protect myself in that way? But set a timer for 10 minutes and write a letter to my person and just say, dear sweetheart, whoever, and see what comes up, and maybe you see that at 5 minutes, you start feeling those signals of overwhelm and you go, okay, I touched into it. My nervous system is now telling me that I'm outside of my window. I'm going to stop, thank myself for that moment and use that as information moving forward. I had a client who, there was a certain song where she was like, I cannot make it all the way through this song. And I haven't been able to in almost a decade. Wow. And so for us, I was like, okay, that's your edge. And she was saying, I want to, and I know there's stuff there. And I know that I turn it off when it gets to a certain point, or I can only listen to it for so long. And so then we go, okay, how can we listen to half the song, not push yourself too much, but just feel what you feel for that first half, without trying to push it further, without trying to force your system into a place where it's not ready to go, and just be with that. But I think a lot of it is the practical slowing down and giving yourself space. And I think we can contain it in certain ways so that it feels not so daunting. Because if we're in activation and go, go, go for so long, being asked to slow down and feel grief, like that's an enormous ask. And so I tend to look at it as like, what's a very practical, bite-sized way we can experiment and just start there with whatever information you get from that. I hope that answers that question.
It definitely does. I love that. I'm really taking from that those bite-sized chunks, because actually, when would we ever take a leap out of our comfort zone straight through all of our blocks and fears, a giant leap to any goal? That's not how it works. As me as a coach, I was just sat there thinking, yeah. And actually what I could really feel is that very compassionate, exploring the edge. You mentioned the edge and that exploration. And actually in my own journey, I really resonated with that, because when I'm connecting into, yes, in those 4 weeks, because of my mama's purpose to my daughter, I was so present. But that doesn't mean that I've always been consistently present since then. Yeah. I'm a human. And there's been times where it has been deeply painful. I've really felt that full force of the trauma come through. And I've lost hours numbing on social media or wherever else I typically go to numb. But actually I can really connect into, there's been certain points where I've just said, can I just sit and can I just be with this for a moment? Can I look at a picture of my daughter and let myself feel? And to your point, even just a few seconds can be more than enough to just say, okay, I can reconnect back in. I know it's within me, but now I can go back and watch Netflix, and that's okay.
Yes. Yeah. Just that little bit of space, and I think it's such a powerful practice, because each time we do that, even if it's for a few seconds, you're showing your body and your psyche and your whole being that it's safe to go there. So even if you can't go there for more than a few seconds, the practice in itself, it's not about how much, it's just, can I expose my system? Here is pain. I see it. I can feel it. And I'm going to touch back out. And the next time I go towards it, that fear is going to lessen. Like, that's the idea, is that over time, it's like, okay, I can hold that. And then I can hold it for a little bit longer and a little bit longer and a little bit longer. I remember it was about 6 months or so. And I have this vivid memory because I took pictures from that day, because it was the most stunning sunset I had seen in a very long time. That says a lot, because sunsets are beautiful where I am. But I was feeling so agitated and irritable and activated. And that was a state I found myself in a lot after my dad died. I think in large part due to the caregiving that I stepped into before he died. Vigilance was high. My activation was stuck. It was really hard for me to come back down. And so I was having a day where I wanted to like crawl out of my own skin. It was that feeling of like, I don't know what to, I'm in like a freeze response. Like I'm activated, and also my shutdown response is sitting on top of that. So I'm like edgy, but I don't know what to do. And I'm just sort of frozen. And so my brain, I'm like, okay, just take yourself on a walk, just go outside, go to the beach. And I remember thinking to myself, I have to touch into this. I know what this is, and I'm so afraid to go there. And I don't even know where to start. Like, do I just start talking to him? Do I think of a certain memory? Like, I was getting so analytical about it. And so I just put on his favorite music, and it just blew the lid off of any avoidant strategies. For me, there's nothing like music that like drops me in faster, to feeling. And so I just sat there on the beach watching the sunset, just absolutely sobbing. And I told myself, you have 3 songs.
Oh, wow.
and I kept it. And at the end of the 3rd song, I was like, that was a lot, and I'm tired, and I'm going to walk home now. But
Wow.
I think that's when I had started realizing like, oh, you can actually set this up so it does feel a little controlled, which is okay to want a little bit of control in that.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And also I think there's a lovely invitation there as well of find whatever it is you mentioned around to help you to drop into your feelings. For you, it's music. For me, definitely nature. Anywhere in nature. We live near the forest. Just go out, be with it. As soon as I'm with the trees, it's almost like I can have a different conversation with myself by having a conversation with them. And I love that. I love that from that release that it could bring, if only we allow ourselves to do just that. And you mentioned as well around caregiving, and obviously that is, I think we really underestimate. It's almost like there's just one shade of grief, which is sad for the person who we've lost, without understanding that actually there are all of these different transitions. There are these different periods in our life where we have to lean into caregiving and all that brings up, as well as that moment where we have to transition and our beloved has gone. And so we are no longer a caregiver. And obviously that's another shift. There's also anticipatory grief that comes through, and any and many other losses. I'd love just to speak to, I suppose, your experiences of different types of grief, whether it is anticipatory grief or anything else that came up for you, because I think it's so unspoken about. And as well, I know for you, you became a mom as well. Was it 1.5 years after your dad died? So there's also a lot that is in the aftermath as well.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a very big question, so we can start. Let's just talk about
there's so much there. Yeah, I'll start with the anticipatory grief. Sometimes I'll actually use the phrase anticipatory loss instead of anticipatory grief, because it can sound like, oh, I haven't reached grieving yet because they haven't died yet. When I think that the experience of anticipating loss is its own thing. Like, this is not pre-grief. It's not preparing you, I believe. And I'll say I'm speaking from personal experience and from every client I've worked with who's been a caregiver and in this position. Nothing prepares you for permanent absence. Like, you can't, I mean, there are things you can do to honor and find sacredness within that. I've heard beautiful stories. I've worked with clients who walked their person home in exactly the way that was best for their person and for them. And it is its own experience, I believe, anticipatory loss, anticipatory grief. It is separate from the grief that happens with death. I think what I've seen happen a lot, and I'll say this was very true for myself, is that there is a kind of vigilance and activation. There's this intense presence while there's also this acknowledgement that the end is coming, that separation is coming. You're living in this dual reality for weeks and months, years. And the activation that is required of your system to stay in that place is pretty incredible. The things that we have to compartmentalize or don't have the space to feel, you know, there are so many pieces of us so often that we have to put away or say not right now or can't acknowledge until we are no longer in that actively caregiving for our person place. And yet, when we aren't in that place anymore, that means that they've died. And then we are thrown into this completely new place where we're reorienting our lives and our identity and our beings around this permanent absence and everything that has come before that, all of the fear, all of the vigilance, it just gets stuffed down like this huge thing, the biggest thing just comes and sits on top of it. And that is typically the thing that the rest of society is looking at too, saying, I'm so sorry for your loss, but no one's saying, how was that to be handed opioids and morphine to give to your dying loved one to make their death less painful and maybe a little bit quicker because they were suffering? Like, no one's asking about the brutal realities of caregiving, what you had to witness, what you had to do, the decisions that you had to make, because then death is here and then you're dealing with that, And so I think that, well, I'll say in my personal experience, that was something that took me actually a very long time to understand. Like, there was so much trauma I had to work through from that period of time, which for me was about 6 months. So many things that I could hardly comprehend had happened. And again, like you're in such a place of survival during that anticipation time as well, that there isn't a lot of presence happening. And there's this weird like time warp that happens. Time is going too quickly. You see death coming, and because you see the suffering and the changes, it's also like crawling by. And you want it to be over for them. There's so much complexity in that. There's guilt. There's, am I a bad daughter or partner or parent for being so exhausted? Am I a bad person for thinking they don't have much longer and not holding on to hope and saying they're going to make it? There's so much complexity in that. There's so much trauma. There's so much opportunity for traumatic shit to happen during that time, I'll say, that I think it can really complicate the grieving process post loss. And that's something I've worked with many people, is they'll come to me and say, I don't know where to put all of this. Like, there's the loss itself, but also I can't tell anyone the details of what I had to do or see or the conversations I had to have. Like, there's these really hard, intimate details when you're in that position that you're pretty damn sure no one in your life wants to imagine or talk about or hear about. So it's just, I don't hear it talked about a lot. And it's something I feel very strongly about, because it's so big. It's so, so big.
Yeah, it is. And to your point, it's so unspoken, and particularly when it's a parent, suddenly the whole relationship is flipped. And witnessing, for example, my parents with my grandparents and my aunts as well, there's so much, to your point, that comes with it. That is, if we take that across all of society and everybody who's not able to speak to that, that's a lot of trauma that's just being pushed down. And I guess as well, because of the medicalization of our world, and that caregiving has been pushed outside of our, I suppose back in back in the day, however long, 100 odd years ago. But
Mhm.
we would have, I guess, grown up witnessing that caregiving just happening around us, just as we had cared for when we're children. We witnessed it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And yeah, even for me, just spending one day at my grandparents' care home and witnessing certain things where I just think, wow, that's not my granddad that I knew, and that's not it just, yeah, there's a lot there when you're going through it. Let alone if you're obviously hands-on in a caregiving role and in that space. And I've got friends who have been or are still in similar positions with their parents. And yeah, it's
Mhm.
something that needs to
Mhm.
be definitely needs to be spoken about. Like, I guess what would you say for if anyone's tuning in and you mentioned anticipatory loss, which I love that
Mhm.
framing.
Mhm.
Is there any advice that you could give to them of just how they can connect with that or just support themselves on the
Mhm.
daily as perhaps
Mhm.
they are in a caregiving role?
Yeah, I would say there's something that my own therapist said to me a while ago. I would say no, that this is going to be one of the hardest things you ever do, and don't make yourself wrong for how hard and impossible this feels, and just tend to the animal. And my therapist says that to me all the time. She says, Rio, tend to the animal. Like when you're overwhelmed and there's no fixing it, there's no thinking through it, there's no different perspective that you need, you're doing what you need to do. Are you eating? Do you have water? Everything else, like what other non-essential things can you just take off your plate and know that you are in survival, that you are actually outside of your window of tolerance. You're beyond your capacity. And you're not wrong for that. And so just knowing that that's where you are and accepting that you're being stretched right now. How do you take care of yourself within that? How do you rally as much support as possible? I think that's something that I did not do. I didn't know any of this when I was in that position. And so, well, a COVID caveat here, I will say my mom and I were full-time caregivers because it was either he go in a hospital and we risk never seeing him again because of
Wow.
COVID and their restrictions to not allow us in,
Oh, Rio.
or he dies at home. And so that's why we were full-time at home, and we would have
Oh,
nurses and masks and the booties and everything, helmets, like come in and try to tend to his wounds. But other than that, they're like, here, the the meds, and if this happens, you have your supplies over here. And other than that, call us. So it was just this. I didn't know to reach out to friends to say, hey, like, I may not text you or call you for the next 2 months, and that's just got to be okay. Like, there's so much there that in retrospect, you're like, wow, I, I thought that this was something that was just being added on to my plate while I function as normal. But again, you're in survival and you're not thinking. There is like very little logic happening. You're just reacting. You're just responding to what you have to. And so if someone is in that now and listening to this now, that's what I would say is like, lean on whatever support you have, no matter how big or small. Have people drop wine off at your house, have people drop food off at your house. I had a friend she wrapped a bottle of wine in like the softest blanket I've ever felt in my life with like a little stuffed animal and I think a book, and just left it on my porch and didn't say anything. And I just opened my door and I was like, oh, it was just right. Those like creature comforts of just, you're going through the impossible. Anything, like, what can I do? What can we do? So lean into those people, and then try to, as impossible as it feels, like, let go of all the non-essentials in whatever way that you can.
Oh, Rio, that's so
Yeah.
so powerful, so beautiful. And also, what I really felt in that as well is the invitation for anyone who is witnessing someone in their orbit who
Yeah.
is going through something like this. I mean, going through it in
Mhm.
COVID as well. I hadn't even
Yeah.
thought about that impact, because that just compounds even more trauma into a traumatic situation.
Mhm.
But I'd
Mhm.
say for those friends who are able to witness and say, hey, how can I show up even without being asked? And to your
Mhm.
point, what are the basics? Food. Yeah, what's that
Basics.
favorite bottle of wine that you love
Yeah.
sharing, and more
Yeah.
social times or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
That I love
Mm-hmm.
that. Just drop it off on the doorstep
Yeah.
and know that that
Yeah.
is going to be so, so meaningful, because it can
Mm-hmm.
be a really, really lonely place otherwise, can't it? And actually, I
Mm-hmm.
could imagine if you're outside of your window of capacity, that when you're in such a hyper aroused or hypo aroused space, I could
Mm-hmm.
imagine that actually often in those times as well, even that thought of reaching out to people, you're just, again, in that just survival mode. You might
Yeah.
not be able to just consciously think, actually, what do I need right now? And I think that's where we
Mm-hmm.
can all have that role of, all right, where do we need to lean in? Bring
Yeah.
that community
Yeah.
spirit in and just be there to support.
Exactly. Because I think so often someone in a caregiving role, and of course there are so many nuances here and so many different ways this can look. If it's a longer period of time, longer being like months and months or years, that person's, they're going to have to touch into normal life, or they're going to want to, or that's going to be good for them at some point. And whether that looks like just sitting next to a person who's comfortable for them, or that looks like having one day, where they feel quote unquote like normal, and maybe can play a game of this or go see a movie. I don't know. I'm thinking things off the top of my head. Like, you need those people too. We need those people too to say, hey, I'm here to help you feel normal for a second. We can talk about it and be in it, or we can just have a day where you're living, and know that that's there, but just feel normal. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Bringing back that sense of normal. What's their
Mm-hmm.
favorite thing to do? Let's just
Yeah.
go do that. Oh, that's so
Yeah.
beautiful. Oh, Rio. Well, I am conscious of the fact that our conversation is soon to have to come to a close. I feel like there's so
Already
many,
that flew by.
I know it's blown by, and I feel like there's so many. What I can really feel from everything that you've shared is the complexity of grief, but when I connect in, I see, and I don't want to say vibrancy from the perspective of minimizing any of that experience and the pain,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that what I can really anchor myself into is just these simple connection points that we can have, whether it's to our own grief or to others' grief, to be able to support them through it. And
Mm-hmm.
actually that vibrancy, just from reconnecting us to our own humanity,
Yes.
that can bring. I just think it's
Mm-hmm.
so powerful, and it's where your work in the world is just incredible and so needed to bring that
Thank
human
you.
connection, I guess, yeah, to a space that is probably quite often quite clinical if it's done in that old school way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it can be. Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, from my experience, I love every therapist that I've worked with. I've always been lucky. I've had an affinity, but actually for me connecting in, I'm like, yeah, there is definitely that layer deeper to be like, we are sitting in space together from a sense of shared lived experience, which even just in itself is going to show me that I can walk this path forwards. It's okay.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly that.
And so from the perspective of your lived experience, I have one final question for you. I ask this of every guest.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, if you could write a note to any past version of yourself, any point in your life, from where you're sitting today, what
Mm-hmm.
words of wisdom or encouragement would you share with her?
I love that question. And what comes up for me, because we were just speaking of this time, was the version of me who didn't know what the F was going on, and her dad was dying and her whole world was turned upside down. And I think I would tell her, you're exactly right. Everything you're feeling is exactly right. You're doing all that you can do. Just, you're not wrong. You're not wrong for any of it. Yeah. I think that's what I would say.
That's beautiful. You're not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So, so beautiful. I feel like that's wise words that any of us could take and should take forwards into, because there's a real messy middle that we can be in those states. And I think that's really powerful. I'm connecting into that guidance. I'm actually saying it now to myself, a few former versions of myself as I sit here, particularly in that wilderness of grief and everything, or anticipatory loss, or whatever it is you're journeying through, caregiving, etc. It's a lot.
I think now too, this just came up for me, so I hope that this is okay to share. What's happening in the world right now too, particularly near where I am, with families being torn apart and floods, whatever tragedy, I think it's so easy for us to question, like, well, that didn't happen to me, so why am I being so affected by it? And it's like, because you're a human and you can imagine that fear. You can imagine pain, and you're not wrong. It's like, let yourself feel that, whether you're anxious because you're hearing about X, Y, and Z nonstop, or you need to take a break or take a day because you're just feeling that collective devastation. I think those words ring true for me now too. It's just for myself and for everyone around me. Like, you're not wrong for being a human and for having empathy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Far from being wrong, you're being beautifully human. And yes. It feels like, it's interesting actually you say that, because I was listening to I think it was on a podcast. I can't remember. If I remember which podcast it is, I will link it. I like to reference other people and uplift others' perspective. Mm-hmm. But they were talking about presence and the fact that actually when we're not present, that we lose our empathy. And you might be able to tell me if this is on the money from sort of the psychological science perspective, but actually just in general, us witnessing others and us being able to not just rush around and fix it, I don't know, and go and make them a cake or whatever it is, anything to get away from just sitting and witnessing, that equally removes just a little bit. If we're not truly present, then we're not able to really tap into that empathy. But equally, that's where our witnessing done in a way where, as you shared, if we need to take a day where we're not looking at social media and we're not connecting into the horrendous news in the world, and a lot of it, all of the news cycles is man-made and avoidable. But I do believe that the more that we connect into it, the more, to your point, that we just root into our human empathy, and that grief holds such a place in that. That's why I'm so passionate about the grief space, because actually I believe there's so much trauma that over history we've just pushed down, wars and genocides, etc., just push it down, we move forwards. But actually, if we were to sit and say, how can we collectively grieve this, and allow ourselves as individuals and in community to say, this hurts, I've got a real strong belief that is where the emergence of a better world will come. Because from that place, we deepen our empathy and we say, actually, enough. Mm-hmm. I'm stepping out of individualism and I'm stepping into something that is more rooted in the collective of our humanity. So, yeah, that's where I'm flowing at the moment.
Couldn't say it better myself. Beautiful. Yes.
Oh, and with that, I feel like we could flow on and do a 2-hour podcast
with that
topic. So maybe there will have to be a part 2 at some point where we dive into this, and also into your journey into motherhood as well, which was an area that we didn't get to speak to today. But obviously that's a very big area, and also particularly for parents who have become parents after they've lost one or both of their parents. So maybe
I have so much to say there, so I would love to come back.
Well, let's not rush that one. We'll save the whole episode. But before we close out on this conversation, I would love for anyone to hear from you. Where can they connect with you, and where can they hear more about your incredible work and offerings?
Sure. So I am I'm pretty active on Instagram. So my handle is thank you. I'm like, it's a heavy space and also sometimes slightly entertaining, which sounds weird to say, but humor is a way that I cope, and apparently many other people do.
That's why I connected with you. I was like, I'm in this space now.
Yes. So I'm at And That's Grief over there. I also have a weekly-ish Substack newsletter called Touching the Fire. And that's where I'll do a little bit more of a deep dive into these little bite-sized pieces on Instagram, and where I typically talk more about tools and how to apply them, etc. And then I have a one-to-one wait list if you're curious about individual support. But my current group is open. So we start on August 7th, and I have a group program called the Grief Portal Program. And it is 8 weeks long, and we are using education and understanding and parts work, so internal family systems and all of the parts of us that are holding all of the messy parts of this. And then we use that to go into the body and work with a little bit of the somatics and where we hold all of that, and then how we alchemize that using creativity. And so at the end of the 8 weeks, we'll walk away with a completed art journal of all of these pieces of us that are navigating loss. And I'm so excited about this group. So if anyone is interested in learning more about that, I can certainly send you the information and links. And I'm always open to questions and curiosities to make sure it's a good fit for people who want to join. Yeah.
Wow. Powerful alchemy.
Yes.
It feels like that's a whole other conversation as well, that how we can alchemize. But I literally, my heart was just bursting as you were sharing that. And to be able to understand all parts of us, because that's what I've really witnessed in my own grief. Actually, it brings up a lot of other parts that we have just been ignoring. And you can't ignore them when they're suddenly jumping up and down and shouting really loudly. So how powerful to do that in a group journey.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to it. Yeah. It should be really special.
Oh, how special. Well, I'm going to put all of the links in the show notes and make sure that you go and check that out. And I would say to anyone who's tuning in, get Rio in your orbit, not least because that humor is exactly what I needed at various points in my grief journey. But I think to that point of all of these other creative ways that we can feel, we can express our grief. So Rio, I'm so grateful to you for just bringing all of you today with such depth and such meaning. It's been a true joy to speak to you.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure, and I can't wait to talk more in the future.
Bring on part 2.
Yeah.
All of my gratitude to you for joining me for another Dead Conversation. Death on the Daily is edited by David Strutt. The music is Set Free by Katie Gray. And I am Tanya Wilkinson. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would be over the moon if you can rate, review, and subscribe. It really, really helps me to get the word out there. And if you want to say hi or to hear more about my work as a coach and death doula, including how I support my clients to navigate their death on the daily, then all of the ways that you can connect with me are in the show notes. I'll be back soon with some more Dead Conversations. And in the meantime, take good care of yourself and others. There's a cold fire, there's a crossfire, and there's something